The wind had already stripped the warmth from our bones when the last match went out. No one spoke. The snow absorbed our breath, swallowing even the sound of despair. I remember staring at the blackened tin pot, its rim frozen to the earth, a relic of our failed attempt at heat. The night pressed closer, and in that silence, I learned what hunger sounds like. It isn't a growl, it's a pulse behind your ribs, steady and cruel. We'd been marching 3 days through what used to be a forest, now just white ghosts of trees and the memory of paths. The officers called it a temporary hold, but it felt like exile. Our rations were gone, our fuel soaked, our hope buried under the same snow we tried to melt. I rubbed my hands together, skin splitting at the knuckles, trying to imagine warmth. Fire. The very idea of it felt ancient, mythical. Somewhere to my right, Miller cursed softly. He'd been guarding the last block of fuel gel, a useless brick now, solid as stone. We all stared at it, that small, unreachable sun. When the first man collapsed, no one rushed to him. We had learned the arithmetic of survival. Movement equaled life. Stillness meant surrender. That night, as frost crept up my boots and I tried to sleep without shivering, I caught the faint smell of something impossible. Boiled oats. Someone, somewhere nearby, was cooking without flame. I didn't believe it then. But by morning, we would all gather around the impossible. Me, half frozen, watching steam rise where no fire burned. The ember of curiosity had survived, even when the flame hadn't, and that was how it began. By dawn, the world had turned to glass. Every breath hung in the air like smoke from a fire that no longer existed. I woke to the sound of nothing. No boots, no orders, no flame crackling against metal. Only the wind, low and constant, like a warning. The man who'd been cooking was gone. All that remained was a dented mess tin pressed into the snow, its bottom warm to the touch. Steam still curled from its rim, refusing to die. And I realized what terrified me most wasn't hunger anymore. It was the mystery of warmth without fire. We'd fought many enemies by then. Men, machines, the slow machinery of exhaustion. But none of them were as invisible as this one. Cold doesn't march, it waits. It seeps in, patient as memory. It steals the will first, then the hands, then the heart. I watched it claim Miller that morning. His breath stopped forming clouds before his eyes closed. No shot fired, no sound made. I wrapped my greatcoat tighter, feeling the weight of the unseen enemy pressing from all sides. Around me the world was white, but it didn't shine. It absorbed every glimmer, swallowed color whole. The earth felt hollow beneath my boots, as if even the ground had retreated inward to conserve its last warmth. In that silence, I made a decision. I would find whoever made that steam. I would learn how to cook without flame, to feed life without fire. Not just for me, but for the ones still breathing beside me, because in war, death announces itself with noise. Survival, I was learning, arrives in silence. And somewhere in that frozen wasteland, silence had just begun to whisper back. The maps said Eastern Front, winter of 43. To us, it was simply the end of warmth. Our unit had been cut off after a supply convoy never arrived. 30 men reduced to 12, 12 to 7, and by then, no one counted. We had rifles but no bullets, uniforms but no insulation, discipline but no orders. The snow erased everything except instinct. Food was memory. Fire, a myth. We had learned to crush biscuits to powder and swallow them dry, to drink melted ice from canteen lids, to rub our hands raw just to feel the pulse beneath. The fireless meal I'd smelled that night haunted me more than hunger. How could anything boil in that cold? How could anyone eat while the rest of us froze? At dusk I followed the scent, weak, metallic, but real. It led me to the remains of an old field kitchen half buried in snow. Inside I found a small group of engineers, gaunt as ghosts, bent over tin boxes wrapped in rags. They weren't feeding fires. They were feeding chemistry. They showed me one. Metal canisters filled with quicklime and salt, salvaged from abandoned medical crates. Add water, they said, and it burns without flame. The heat came from reaction, not combustion. Enough to warm a meal, even in a storm. It was science disguised as salvation. That night, as we huddled around those silent cookers, I felt something shift. The enemy wasn't the cold anymore, it was ignorance. The war wasn't just between nations. It was between men who remembered how to adapt and those who didn't. We ate quietly, reverently, steam rising like ghost fire between us. For the first time in weeks, the air smelled alive again. By the third day, the quicklime was nearly gone. Each packet felt like a relic, handled with the same care we once gave ammunition. Hunger became ritual. We took turns heating tins over the chemical flames. No light, only the hiss of reaction, that quiet miracle of warmth born from water and stone. But survival always demands a price. The fumes stung our lungs. Some men grew dizzy, their eyes rimmed with frost and fatigue. We learned to hold our breath as the vapors rose, timing each motion like a prayer. Even so, no one complained. The warmth against our palms was worth the risk. I remember one night when the cold broke into our camp like a thief. The snow fell sideways, wind shrieking through the torn canvas of our shelter. The chemical fires sputtered out, the lime too wet to react. We sat in darkness, waiting. The storm sounded like the sky tearing itself apart. Someone muttered about home, how his mother used to bake bread so hot the crust cracked like thunder. Another laughed, hollow and short as if the sound itself might warm him. When dawn came, 3 didn't wake. They hadn't frozen stiff. They looked peaceful, as if sleep had simply chosen not to end. I wrapped one man's fingers around the tin cup he'd been holding. It was still faintly warm. That morning, I realized endurance isn't strength. It's surrender, letting the body ache, letting the fear stay, but never letting the motion stop. We marched again, slower now, each step a negotiation with the frost. The fireless cookers rattled in our packs, precious as breath. We didn't just carry food. We carried proof that life could outsmart death. But that night, something changed again. A new idea was born. It happened by accident, as most salvation does. We were camped near the husk of a farmhouse, its roof gone, its hearth choked with ice. I'd gone searching for wood I knew I wouldn't find when I saw it. A dented metal barrel half buried in snow, its rim crusted white. Inside, someone long ago had left grain, spoiled, frozen, forgotten. I scooped some out anyway, more out of defiance than hope. That night, I decided to try something reckless. I crushed the grain, poured water over it, sealed it inside one of the chemical tins, and buried the whole thing beneath my coat. The lime reacted, the metal grew warm, and for the first time, I smelled not oats, but survival. It wasn't cooking, it was patience disguised as chemistry. The slow rise of temperature, the hiss of steam, the smell of life coaxed from frost. We waited an hour, 2, until the tin was cool enough to touch. When I opened it, the contents were soft, steaming, edible. A meal without flame, without risk of discovery, without light to betray us. The others gathered close, eyes reflecting the ghost glow of steam. I handed out spoonfuls like relics from a forgotten altar. No one spoke. For those few moments, time bent backward, back to kitchens and mothers, to warmth that didn't demand suffering. That night I wrote in the corner of my field journal, "Fire is a choice, not a thing. Heat can come from resolve." We had discovered the unthinkable, a way to live quietly, and as the snow fell again, I looked toward the horizon, thinking of all the men still burning through their rations, still striking useless matches in the wind. We had no fire, yet we were fed. We became craftsmen of survival. Every scrap of metal, every shard of glass, every dented tin became a tool in our new trade, the art of making warmth without flame. I showed the others how to grind the quicklime finer, to mix it with snow instead of liquid water so the heat would last longer. We learned to layer tins, meal above, reaction below, stacked like prayers whispered under breath. Each step of the process mattered. Too much water, and the reaction died in steam. Too little, and it never began. We timed it by sound, the faint hiss that meant heat, the silence that meant failure. Soon, our camp became a silent orchestra of chemical fire. Steam drifted between the trenches like ghosts of vanished campfires, and for once the night didn't feel like an enemy. One evening, I tested the method under marching conditions. I tucked the lime pack and tin inside my coat as we advanced through a ruined village. By the time we stopped, my chest was damp with heat, and the ration inside was warm enough to eat. It wasn't comfort, it was defiance. Word spread fast. Other units tried it. Some failed, others perfected it, each soldier turning into a quiet engineer. Fireless cooking was no longer a curiosity. It was doctrine, whispered in trenches, passed through frostbitten hands like contraband hope. When command finally heard, they didn't question it. They just took notes. A new kind of heat had been born, one invisible, one unstoppable. We were soldiers, yes. But for that brief chapter of the war, we were also scientists. We didn't invent the method. We rediscovered it, something older than flame itself, the will to eat, even when the world had frozen solid. By spring, word had traveled farther than we ever could. The same idea that had kept 7 of us alive began crossing front lines, languages, even ideologies. The British called it field heating. The Russians, silent rations. We called it what it was, hope that didn't smoke. I saw it first in a prisoner exchange camp. Men who'd never shared a word before now traded formulas instead, ratios of salt to lime, methods for sealing tins, tricks to keep the reaction steady. The fireless cookers had become currency, and not just for soldiers. Villagers used them when the bombings cut power. Nurses warmed water for medicine in shattered hospitals. Even the refugees fleeing the cities carried small tins packed with powder and promise. It was strange, watching something born of desperation turn into quiet revolution. We had started with hunger. We had ended with ingenuity. I sometimes thought about how many lives were saved not by rifles, but by chemistry scribbled on the back of ration cards. One night, I passed a group of new recruits sitting in the snow, steam rising from their tins. They didn't know my name. They didn't know how it began. They only knew that it worked. And that was enough. I stood for a long time, watching their silhouettes blur against the fog. There was no firelight, no glow, no crackle, just warmth shared among men who would never meet again. The air smelled faintly of lime and grain. In that moment, I realized the truth of war. Invention doesn't come from genius. It comes from need. And the quietest ideas are often the ones that survive the longest. Years later, when the guns were silent and the world pretended to be whole again, I studied what we had done. It wasn't magic, not luck, it was chemistry's quiet mercy. Quicklime, calcium oxide, meeting water to form calcium hydroxide. The reaction released heat enough to boil, to cook, to live. Simple, invisible science in a war obsessed with spectacle. The irony still humbles me. While nations built weapons to tear the sky apart, our greatest invention was a meal that made no sound. No smoke to reveal your position, no glow to betray you, no spark to burn the skin of the night. The physics were pure, the philosophy profound. Fire consumes, reaction transforms. One devours fuel, the other reclaims potential. I came to understand that what saved us wasn't chemistry, it was perspective. The refusal to see fire as the only form of heat, the humility to let nature's smaller forces work in silence. There's beauty in that surrender. The same beauty you find in snowflakes melting on your palm. Fleeting, real, enough. Science, I realized, is faith's quieter twin. Both ask you to trust what you can't see, to act before proof appears. When I teach it now, years later, gray-haired and unshaken, I tell my students that warmth is never just temperature. It's intention, meeting reaction, belief, igniting process. Sometimes I bring out the old tin I kept from that winter. It's rusted, harmless, but when I tap its lid, I swear it still hums faintly, as if remembering. The fireless cookers taught us the oldest law of survival. Not every light must burn to give warmth, and perhaps that's the difference between those who live through the dark and those who don't. Decades later, when storms knock down power, lines and the cities flicker into darkness, I still think of that winter. I see the frost on the tin lids, the steam curling like spirits, the sound of quiet defiance. I see how survival looked then. No bravado, no roaring fires, just men learning to whisper warmth back into existence. The world has changed, but hunger hasn't, nor has the cold. People now depend on grids and gadgets, on heat that hums behind walls. But when the power dies, the silence feels the same as it did in '43, sudden, humbling, absolute. I've watched neighbors panic at the first outage, forgetting that warmth was once made by will alone. I keep one of those old tins in my shed, along with a bag of lime and salt. Not for nostalgia, for reminder. When the storms come, I light no match. I just listen, to the hiss of water meeting stone, to the echo of a time when men trusted reaction more than fire. Sometimes, when I show the trick to my grandchildren, they look at me as if I'm performing alchemy. I tell them it's not magic, it's memory, a small inheritance from a generation that refused to freeze. And when the meal steams quietly in the dark, they fall silent too. They sense what I felt then, that warmth is not granted, it's made, that ingenuity is not invention, it's remembrance. The war ended long ago, but the lessons stayed. Fireless cooking wasn't just about food. It was about what it means to endure when comfort abandons you. And I wonder if, someday, when their own lights go out, they'll remember the hiss and know they're not helpless. Sometimes I wake before dawn, when the house is still and the world feels unfinished. The air in winter carries the same sharp taste it did all those years ago. I sit by the window, and for a moment, I can almost see the steam rising again from those old tins, the breath of men who refuse to vanish. People think survival is about strength. It isn't. It's about imagination, the courage to find fire where no flame exists. When I see modern kitchens glowing with buttons and glass, I think of how simple warmth used to be. Not convenient, but earned. Not loud, but true. The war taught me that humanity's light doesn't come from explosions or engines. It comes from the quiet chemistry of endurance, men sharing heat without fire, compassion without words. We didn't conquer the cold. We learned to live beside it, to make it part of the rhythm. Even now, when I hear the kettle hiss, I smell lime and grain. I see faces lost to frost and time. The sound isn't just boiling water, it's memory reacting with the present. And I understand that some lessons never extinguish. They smolder, waiting for the next generation to need them. The ember that wouldn't die, that's what we carried home. Not pride, not victory, just proof that warmth can exist without destruction. I close my eyes and breathe in the quiet. The world hums softly, alive with invisible fires. We never lit a flame that winter, but somehow we became it. If stories like this remind you what endurance really means, subscribe and keep these lessons alive.